Welcome to the second installment of Archetypal Advent. Today, more news from Warner Brothers and the DCU know what's up, and it's not diversity. Welcome to the Archetypal Advent, an extension of the Archetypal Man Podcast, where we cover news, happenings, and manifestations of archetypes in our world, and possibly outside our worldly realm as well. I am co-host Apollo.
And I'm co-host Aries. And boy, speaking of manifestations, man, we've had some manifestations abound lately.
That we have. I would say in our first Advent episode, we were on the right track. Zaslav is coming in with guns blazing, his leadership style having been described as toxic strongman tactics, as he's cut the diversity, equity, and inclusion budget to essentially zero, it seems. Which is,
I like him already.
I know, me too. The weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth from the DEI crowd is it's just music to my ears. I wish I could take the headphones off to listen to it, but I have to listen to the podcast recording.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so they had their little day in the sunshine with their completely unearned funding, and many other companies. I'm certain the Marvel and everybody at Disney is going to be going for much longer, but seems to be over at DC. And then the big news is that Zaslav has appointed Peter Safran and James Gunn to head the DCU movie section. So we'll weigh in on that as well and maybe get a little bit archetypal towards the end.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
All right.
Yeah. Peter Safran, couldn't tell you much about him. Don't know much about him. I know that he's kind of a guy in the game as far as lawyer, so his own little production company. Other than that, not too much about him. James Gunn's more the guy I've heard of. I wasn't particularly enthused. I wasn't like really excited when I found out that he was, appointed to the role. I've seen a couple of his movies. He's okay. Don't know if time will tell if he is a fit for DC.
Right. Do we just want to address the elephant in the room with James Gunn?
Sure, absolutely. Let's address that elephant. Yeah.
So he was let go from Disney Marvel right after I can't remember, a few years ago, right after Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Some tweets he had made years ago, like a decade ago, surfaced. He'd erased them. They were extremely off color and offensive even to me. And I mean, if you offend me, that's really saying something. I mean, talking about subjects that I don't even want to repeat. So I've tried to really look into this because some of them were so off color that you wonder how he wasn't practically arrested for some of the stuff he said. He apologized for them, said that he was just being kind of like a teenager or just trying to stir things up. Some of it was in terms of, inappropriate sexual activities. And he's a married man. He's got kids. He does have some history with the Catholic Church, it seems, or some church. And there was potentially abuse in his community and his family. And so it seems to be, he was making commentary on those things by being really sarcastic.
Yeah.
So, when I first heard James Gunn was hired, I was like, oh my God, no way. But it seems to be he's not behaving like that anymore. And he's learned to kind of control his tongue. So I liked Guardians of the Galaxy. The first two are really good.
Yeah, I saw the first one. I haven't seen the second one, but the first one was really good. I had no issues with it. It was a well constructed, well told story, I thought.
Yeah, I'd say the guy can tell a story, and even some of the things he was saying in terms of his off color comments were he wanting to point out the importance of family and not causing abuse in the world. And you look at the Guardians of Galaxy and the character arcs there, they're becoming a family. They're learning how to get along. It's a very heartwarming story in a lot of ways. So I hope he brings that to DC. I really do. If he does, then I think some good things can really happen.
Yeah. Yep. I believe that too. It's I'll give him a shot for sure. All this stuff, like you said, being on the side that we're on, looking at it from the perspective that we're looking at. It's nothing but fun under the sun, honestly, watching all this happen with DC and watching how it's affecting the rest of the entertainment community and the media and everything. So
Yeah,
it's
for
just
sure.
it's shaping up to be quite a story. So it'll be interesting to see how this one pans out, and I'm going to give it a shot for sure.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say about James Gunn and Peter Safran because it's too early to tell. Other news, this is big news, maybe even bigger in some ways. Henry Cavill has announced that he is officially returning as Superman.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That is a huge one, and a huge win for the Restore the Snyderverse community.
Right.
It's really kind of a realization of that was definitely on the laundry list, especially when I was playing around in that community, as everybody wanted Cavill back as Superman, and now that he's officially back, it's a big deal. So. Who knows what's going to happen next? But there are definitely theories. There are theories abound as to what the next thing is going to be.
Right.
And you and I were talking about that kind of loosely the last few days when we heard the news that Cavill was returning, and then of course there was Zack Snyder's message to Henry Cavill that he sent to him, and where he mentioned that he was looking forward to working with him again. Just little things here and there that kind of beg the question: is the Snyderverse being restored, but not in name? I think that's how you put it.
Yeah. And obviously this is just total guessing. I would say that we are getting some level of the Snyderverse, just not in name, as you said.
Yeah.
Will it be full on Zack Snyder, Joseph Campbell's hero's journey? Probably not. But I bet they're going to return to some level of that because Zaslav wants to make money. With every passing news cycle from DC and Warner Brothers, it seems that they were definitely cut off from the ESG slush fund, and they're actually going to try to make money at this thing, which is amazing. And in order to do that, they're going to have to actually get people that want to see these movies, which is going to be, oh God, middle-aged white guys like you and I and our children and teenage boys. Because who is it that watches comic book movies?
Yeah.
Those people.
Exactly.
People
Those
like
people,
us.
yeah.
That's just what's going to bring... And so they're going to have to serve what we want. And we kind of like traditional archetypal stories. So seeing Superman in there, Batman, there's rumors of Ben Affleck coming back as Batman. I think Superman 2 definitely seems to be in the works, according to the rumor mill. And so that'll be really interesting. I mean, if that's one of the first ones that comes out, that'll be very telling, I think, as to what direction they're going to be going, whether a lot of Zack Snyder's concepts and ideas. I wouldn't be surprised to see him as a producer, or maybe he's going to be a behind-the-scenes consultant that they want to credit. I think they're just kind of ever so slowly implementing some of the new ideas that James Gunn is going to have, but a lot of the stuff from the Snyderverse. So it's like Snyderverse 2.0 with a different name.
It seems like they're using the Snyderverse as like the story treatments, like they've already established it as the canon, not the Justice League.
Right.
The Zack Snyder cut is the confirmed canon that they're working from. So that in itself was big. I remember before this sleigh ride even kicked off, really. I remember reading that DC confirms Zack Snyder's Justice League is confirmed canon. Going forward, and I'm like, that's
really
not a small
something.
thing.
No,
that is not a small thing.
That's a big thing. Hey, why don't you talk for just a second? I'm going to stoke up my fire here.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Got to stoke that fire. But yeah, really, really interesting happening with the Zack Snyder being canon and the Zack Snyder Justice League. We'll see where it goes from here, but
for sure.
I can tell you what it looks like.
Which leads us to our next thing, speaking of the Justice League. What exactly did happen in Justice League, and why was Zack Snyder's vision essentially slashed and thrown in the trash?
That's a great question, and it's very interesting. You and I have had in-depth discussions about it regarding the differences. You've only seen the good version of Justice League. You've only myself. I had the misfortune of seeing both versions, but
and I will say I've watched a few videos on the differences between the two versions, so I feel like I can at least address it somewhat.
Oh, good. Okay, so you're briefed anyway, so that's briefed. Good.
That's a good way.
I mean, night and day. The differences between the movies.
Yeah, why don't you give a quick summary of the differences, the main differences as you see it?
The main differences, they changed the movie in every possible way. As soon as Zack Snyder left the picture, they changed it. Joss Whedon came up and got permission. They pretty much just gave this guy a blank check and said, whatever you need to do it. And he's like, okay, I want to go back. They went back and reshot, like, I can't remember exactly if it was 60, 70 or 80% of the movie, but they definitely re-rendered most of the movie. He even wanted to change the lighting. He wanted to, change the way the movie looked. He even, fundamentally changed the main, antagonist, Steppenwolf, changed him from looking to the way that, Zack Snyder had him look in his cut of the movie, and changed him to look like, well, I guess everybody in the Snyderverse community and even the critics of the Justice cut he said they looked like sad puppy dog man, which that's what he looked like.
Yeah,
they gave
definitely did in the videos I've seen.
And they cut about 80% of his dialogue. Syrian Hines, who did the voice of Steppenwolf, was so pissed off on opening day when he finally saw the actual cut of the movie. He pretty much said something to the effect of, I'm surprised I'm even credited. I'm not even in this movie. Wow. And he was pissed because he did just amazing voice work for that movie, and they cut most of it. The fundamental villain hierarchy of villains for Justice League was changed. In Zack Snyder's original cut, it was Darkseid. And it was Steppenwolf, and his arc was trying to get back into his graces after a monumental failure that cost him a campaign. Whereas in Justice's retool of the film, he just made it about Steppenwolf, who is mother obsessed.
Right. So it's my understanding that in the Justice League, Darkseid and the planet Apocalypse and the Anti-Life was just completely missing.
Yeah, completely gone. Nothing about Darkseid, nothing about the anti-life equation, nothing about any of that.
Right. So if you watch if you know the lore of Apocalypse and Darkseid in the comics, which I'm somewhat familiar with, and if you watch the Snyder cut, that's the culmination, that's the climax. It's the whole, the pivot that the plot turns on is Darkseid getting the anti-life equation back. Yep.
That's pretty much, Thanos getting the Infinity Stones, right? I mean, it's the crisis.
Right. It's the point. And that plot point right there was what was going to set the tone for everything that came after it in the Snyderverse. And
right.
I mean, because that was going to be the plot. Darkseid found the anti-life equation there on Earth, and he was going to obviously attack, and the Justice League was going to have to stop them, and the movies coming after. And so that wasn't what was put in the theaters, right? The Justice League came out, and so every movie after that in the DCEU changed because no more Darkseid. And
no more Darkseid, no more anti-life, nothing. And
and the movies that came after had the sense of kind of not having a central theme and not knowing what they were doing, and you could kind of feel it, I think. And it wasn't apparent why that it had that somewhat confused feeling until after the Snyder cut came out.
Right. Even some of the critics in their critiques of the various DC movies that happened after the Justice League, like the Harley Quinn movie that came out, they were talking about, well, it seems like these DC movies don't seem to be moving anywhere. I'm like, you don't say, they're not. The entire point of the expanded cinematic universe, which was being crafted by Zack Snyder at the time during the making of Justice League, had been surgically removed from the core of the filmmaking moving forward.
Right.
And it was obvious in just in the content. I mean, everything had been retooled. The Harley Quinn movie fundamentally changed after Zack Snyder left and after they started deconstructing his cinematic universe after Justice League was released.
Right.
They were just dismantling everything. All these movies are being rewritten, reshot, undergoing extensive screenwrites, script writing. And the Harley Quinn movie, which was supposed to be a standalone movie, ended up becoming The Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn. No, I'm not making that up. That is actually the title, the working title of that movie that actually was released.
You know, you lose a tiny piece of masculinity every time you say that title.
This is true, which is why I use it sparingly.
Yeah, as well you should.
But yeah, I mean, people were kind of PO'd at that movie in particular because a lot of people, including myself, really love Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn. I think she's a fantastic casting choice. I think she emulates the character perfectly. And to come out with a movie that was eventually, it was announced as a Harley Quinn movie. And then they retooled the movie pretty much to include a whole bunch of very forgettable one-time intro characters into the comic book world,
Right.
The Black Canary and so on and so forth. They even introduced the Black Mask in the character too in the movie, and he's a big DC villain, but he's only in there for just a little bit. I mean, it's like they just brushed with all these different characters. They couldn't focus on Harley Quinn, and they didn't. And so a lot of people were disappointed and felt that she was a side character in her own movie because of the direction that it was going.
Yeah. Well, I think unfocused is a good way to describe all the DC movies that came after the Justice League. They just seemed to lack a focus that, like, the Marvel, at that point, Marvel definitely had in the Infinity War saga and whatnot. Which leads me to the question, why did they so specifically and so surgically cut out the anti-life equation and Darkseid and the planet apocalypse? And I think it has, I mean, we may hit woo-woo levels, 0 to woo-woo in like 3.2 seconds here. But apocalypse, right? It means revelation of God. Darkseid is essentially a satanic figure or a figurehead of Satan or the Antichrist or something like that. Like, he's constantly searching for the anti-life equation. You and I have talked a bunch about how so much of the socio-political movement we see now it's very non-archetypal and it's almost specifically anti-life, right? Don't have kids.
You always say that there's a formula to it too,
right?
Very formulaic.
It is very formulaic, yes, right? Like, having children is a terrible thing to do in this world because the world is so horrible and we're overpopulated and they're just going to pollute. Well, that's a terrible thing to say. That's absolutely awful. The most meaningful thing most people will ever do in their life is invest in their children because that's what we're archetypally and genetically designed to do. Okay, most people are not going to write Shakespeare-level poetry or a Beethoven symphony, and that's fine. That's not what most people are supposed to do. You're supposed to raise your kids, at least replace yourself, and make the world a little bit better for them so that they can make it better for their children, right? That's your ancestors bled and died and created agriculture and mathematics and made sacrifices so that you can live, and you're just going to throw away your chance at having your genetics and their genetics go forward because CNN tells you it's bad to have children.
Right.
Now, that might be a bit of a stretch to say that the Justice League was made specifically to keep people from having children, but I honestly don't think it's that much of a stretch.
No, I don't think it is too. I've seen and done too much, been studying the archetypes and been watching all these different things unfold in real time. And yeah, it correlates. I really believe it does. Because it all seems, everything that we've been witnessing, the breakdown in stories that we've been following, the breakdown of storytelling as we know it in this culture and in other cultures that we've been seeing inherent in the world even, is it all kind of points to an anti-life direction, a life, really a direction that just kind of leads to the subsequent breakdown of all the things that make life work, resulting in inevitable death. And that's why it just seems so interesting that the anti-life equation was chosen very specifically and very surgically and precisely removed from that cut of Justice League, and moving forward, all knowledge of it, all hinting of it was removed, and all direction that was on that certain path was just completely abandoned,
Right.
and in favor of no direction. I mean, so movies were just made kind of in random. At random, going in random directions. Nobody knew, well, where's this all headed towards? I'm like, well, it seems like if you're standing by the anti-life equation, anywhere but here.
Right. Well, I want to say what I see symbolically, right? So dark side, right? The name dark side, it's talking about the shadow side we all have. Every archetype, certainly in the Jungian tradition, it's got a positive and negative aspect to it, right? The warrior archetype, its positive is defending your family, defending your tribe, being ready for action when necessary. And of course, the shadow side, or the negative side of that, is uncontrolled violence, right? There's the archetypal father. On the positive side, it's benevolent, and he provides for his family, and he trains his children. And on the shadow side, he's a tyrant who tries to control everything. So they cut out dark side, right? One of the things I see in the culture at large, especially with the diversity, equity, inclusion, and wokeness, is this denial of the human shadow that we all have, right? If you're a victim, then essentially you have no shadow side. They want to act like they're pure victims. So that's why they're, I think, so obsessed with victimhood and oppression. Well, I've been oppressed this, so I can't have any negatives to me. Well, no, everyone has a shadow side. We've got huge shadow sides. And so they cut out dark side, right? And dark side lives on apocalypse, which means a revelation of God. I don't know who came up with that, but that's actually spiritually how it works. You don't get the revelation of God until you go through the underworld journey and deal with your shadow side. And the thing you face there is the Antichrist. I mean that less in a religious sense and more in the technical sense. You're facing death and everything that tries to destroy life, right? That shadow, it's like it wants to come up and attack and destroy life itself, right? Because without the proper balance, you need your warrior archetype as a man, but it has to stay firmly in check, right? The sword has to stay sheathed unless and until the sword is needed, or you destroy the life you're trying to build. It's extremely symbolic and very spiritually accurate, the archetypes they were coming up with there, and to simply just cut that and make a essentially namby-pamby superheroes story without the dark side. I mean, we know from what the interviews I've seen and reading some of what Zack Snyder was trying to accomplish, he's very clear on Joseph Campbell's work and even Carl Jung's work, which is derived from Joseph Campbell's work, which is derived directly from Carl Jung. He was very much trying to tell a story about underworld journeys and the shadow side being integrated with Superman, clearly, and even Batman. And Joss Whedon came in and just hacked that out with surgical precision. Why?
Yeah, it was very interesting. I read an article from Screen Rant today that was right before we went on here. I read an article from Screen Rant that was detailing kind of sort of the direction that Joss Whedon was trying to go in specificity with Superman during the Justice League. Now, that was really interesting because he used a lot of his color corrections and a lot of his visual effects retools on Superman, not just his super freaky CGI mouth.
Yeah, do we even need to talk about that?
But also he made a point to kind of bring back his Jerry curl and brighten the colors of his suit. Right. Because in interviews he said he wanted to bring back kind of the hopeful Superman, like from the Reeve era of the hopeful, happy-go-lucky character of Superman.
Right.
And at that point, I understood perfectly why it all didn't work. Why it all didn't work, because what Joss Whedon was trying to do, among other things, what he was trying to do was just completely skip Zack Snyder's underworld journey that he had Superman going on.
Right.
He tried to hijack it. He tried to skip it, and he just tried to pretty much fast forward to the end and just have him return as this happy-go-lucky, albeit weirdly CGI'd character
Right.
that people would suddenly be on board with. And as it turned out, that was one of the criticisms of Joss Whedon's Justice League is all these people who are just talking about, you can't have a dark and brooding Superman. You can't have a Superman who's going through all these human problems. All of a sudden, they're the ones saying, oh, we don't like this. You can't have it like this. He's not supposed to be happy-go-lucky yet. Whoa. When I read that, my head about exploded. I'm like, are you serious? See, the people, as much as
how
they
the
bitched
turntables turn, right?
I know. It's like, as much as the people were bitching and complaining about Zack Snyder's heavy-handed and heavy and dark and brooding storytelling, that is what they accepted because whether they liked it or not, they related to it.
Right.
And they related better to the character for it. And when all of a sudden Joss Whedon comes in and tries to sprinkle his little fairy magic on it and just make everything okay magically, and all of a sudden Superman's back to Christopher Reeve with no explanation given, all of a sudden people are like, no, I'm not on board. I'm not on board with this. This doesn't make any sense.
Right. That's the thing. That's one of our great messages, I think, maybe even one of our core messages is that there's a format to life and stories. And really, I think it's the same format. You can't have all the good and you can't have all the benefit without the sacrifice. The underworld journey is where you learn to sacrifice and make the proper sacrifices at the proper times. And we need that message right now. People aren't getting it from most television shows. We're not getting it from schools anymore. Most people are not religious in terms of having a specific religious affiliation or church they go to. And even though it's hard and it's a horribly ego-destroying message, it's the message we all crave, and it's the message we need. And the Warner Brothers executives, they're the previous ones, they approved, or maybe Joss Whedon, I don't know. We don't know how deep the conspiracy to cut out anti-life went, but it was clearly that's what they were cutting out, was that message, the underworld journey, sacrifice, learning to make, your shadow side integrated. Because Superman, I mean, that's the thing Zack Snyder was clearly trying to say. Superman came as a god, extremely powerful. How do you sit there and be among humans and essentially be a human yourself while being God? Well, that's a pretty tough task. It's also the task we are tasked with in the spiritual sense. Not that we are going to fly or have superhuman strength, but we're all at the archetypal level called to godhood. And if that freaks people out, I apologize, but every religion, including Christianity, says that. It's this journey to make the world a better place through our own proper sacrifices, and that gets us closer to God.
That's right. And it's just like in Batman v Superman, when Batman was fighting Superman and was on the verge of defeating him. Batman told him, he said, you're not a god. You were never even a man.
Right.
So you can't achieve godhood without first becoming a man, which at that point in his journey, Superman hadn't even done yet.
Right.
And
and I know that speaks to me. I suspect it speaks to you in the same way. I was raised as a Christian and eventually left because of, a lot of the trauma I'd gotten and frankly just bad dogma and bad religion I'd been taught and absorbed. And it wasn't until after I had my rite of passage experience and studied masculinity and essentially became a man that Christianity started calling to me again. And I couldn't be a new man in Christ if I had not yet been a man.
That's right.
And here I am getting more out, or getting something spiritual, getting something real too, out of religion now, where I look, whereas before it was just kind of posturing and these futile attempts to get something out of it. And now I'm becoming Christian in spite of not really wanting to become one. It's like this process is almost involuntary now that the archetypes have become active in me. And that's what to get just straight up woo-woo and perhaps religious, I think that's what they were fighting against when they made the Justice League. They don't want to activate that, because then are people going to accept diversity, equity, and inclusion? No. Are they going to accept any of this garbage that you should feel guilty for wanting to live your life and have children and have a family and do meaningful things? That's the message they're trying to fight, I think. No, we should do meaningful things. We should raise families. We should find ways to make the world a better place.
Right.
And not just, inclusion and diversity and equity. What is it that those things accomplish? Social justice? It's not justice. It's not.
Yeah. No, it's not any form of justice by any means. It is actually the antithesis of justice. And, to put an even finer point on this, I just had a thought occur as you were talking, and I thought, okay, so could the former DCEU, the DCEU, right, the one that sucked and the one that's now over with, could it have been just the feeble attempt to try to wean the people off of the stories that were being told?
I think it is and was.
Were they souring that milk? I mean, they were doing a good job of souring it for sure. But yeah, I mean, was that just kind of like, how do we do this? This, Zack Snyder had a vision. We're not on board. That's not the direction we're going on. But, he ended up telling some stories. People are on board for the most part with these stories. How do we sour the milk? How do we get people from one thing onto another? And I'm starting to get the feeling that that's what the feeble attempts of the DC movies that happened after the Justice League were just some kind of an attempt at weaning people off of the actual stories in favor of the message stories.
Right. Well, you say the message. Okay, you want to just jump off the deep end with me here?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm right there with you.
So we've talked about this on some of our other podcasts. When a composer is composing or a storyteller is telling a story, it's often a very otherworldly experience, right? They're inspired. We have that word inspired, which means breathing in. I compose music. I know you do some composing too. You write stories, and you get done and you're like, was that even me? It felt like something took me over, right? There's like a spirit that takes you over. When you're telling archetypal stories, right, there's archetypes in there. I'm not saying Joss Whedon was like, I literally worship Satan. And no, I don't think that would almost be easier. I think it's much more nuanced and much more subtle than that. There is a spirit of the modern woke religion that takes people over.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's that simple. It's just like there's a spirit that takes you over when you compose music or write a good story or do anything creative, when visual arts like that, which is not my thing, but I've heard other people that experience that. When you come in and you're like, okay, you've got this, you have the wokeness and you have the diversity message and you have I guess I'm just saying it is a spirit. And I don't necessarily mean a demonic entity, but in maybe a more technical sense of something that comes in at a different energetic level than this physical realm, right? You're inspired by a certain thing. I really think that's what it is.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I've seen it in so many times, even in my own storytelling experiences when I was writing stories, and things just, when you're not even looking, when you come into agreement, it's like you're entering that realm. It's like you announce your intention. I'm going to tell this story. And that opens you up to this realm where all these little things are flying around, and it's currents and eddies and updrafts, and you can just get swept up, and all you have to be is in that mindset. And I think a lot of things just happen.
Right, totally.
Just like they say, symbolism happens. It does. I think when you're in that mindset, when you're connected and when you're synchronized, things just fall a certain way. And if you're not, or if your intention is the other, then they don't. And things fall apart. And just like you see a lot of stories that had great potential, or stories that seemed like they should have been good, but during the execution, it was forced. They were doing a lot of forced, identity politics in there, and it just felt like it fell flat, fell apart. I think it really does. It just flies apart.
Right. We should probably do an episode on this at some point, but wokeness and all the accompanying things, it's a religion. It has all the hallmarks. It's got tenets of faith and rituals you do, and it's a religion. Mm-hmm. And there's a certain flow or a certain spirit that comes with that religion. And I unfortunately think that spirit is rooted in something like the anti-life equation.
Right. And for whatever reason, the spirit of wokeness, the spirit of diversity politics, the spirit of diversity, inclusion, and all that different rigmarole is a religion that David Zaslav no longer attends to on a weekly basis, and has not paid its tithes in a certain long time, and he's kicked it out. I mean, it's all gone.
I think Warner Brothers and Zaslav has been excommunicated from the Church of Woke. With great bias and
with great panache. And that's we're approaching the 30-minute mark here, so I felt it important to come back to that, where it's he's definitely, as they have surgically removed the anti-life equation, Zaslav is very carefully and surgically removing the wokeness and diversity from the agenda of the storytelling group. Almost every facet of the production and the storytelling groups involved at DC now, every hire he's making seems to be along that line. And it seems like the guy's just set on telling good stories. But as we say, time will tell.
That's true. I mean, I think he's clearly set on making money for the investors, which, hey, is frankly refreshing from a Hollywood executive at this point.
It's a breath of fresh air.
I mean, 10 years ago, I would have thought that's crazy, but here we are. And I agree. I think I'm not trying to worship at the David Zaslav altar. I'm curious as much as anything, but I like the direction it's going. And I think it's a fascinating manifestation and archetypal advent. And I think that should wrap things up for today.
Absolutely. Right. Stay tuned, of course, ladies and gentlemen, for we'll be following this with great curiosity, watching this career with particularly great interest,
Indeed.
To quote Emperor Palpatine. And we'll have more as we get it. And as always, have a very archetypal day.